And welcome back to a fresh episode of the Business Growth Show. I'm your host, Sam Dunning, co-owner over at webchoiceuk.com. And if you haven't yet, check out my weekly email where I'm sharing actionable website and marketing tips, useful podcasts, free guides, resources, and much, much more. You can give it a try over at businessgrowth.email and start your week off with a bang every Monday. So with that said, my guest today is Camille Trent. Camille's the head of content over at Dooley. Welcome to the show. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Early morning here. Thanks for having me, Sam.
Thanks for joining us early morning. I appreciate it. So yeah, looking forward to chatting. We're talking all things category content versus commodity content. So let's not beat around the bush. Let's jump straight in. For anyone that isn't familiar with these terms, Camille, what is each? If you can give us a quick roundup of what each means, really, that'd be great.
Yeah, so everyone's going to have their own sort of definition of it. And I broke it down the other day of my personal sort of definition.
Sure.
So to start off with, Chris Lockhead mentioned this like concept of just calorie-less content, right? Like this really like shallow content, and it kind of
Okay.
being what people want in general, right? Like if you think about listicles and you think about BuzzFeed and just basically like really shallow content, it's easier to consume, right? And
Right.
it seems like easier to implement. And so he gave this example of weight loss, right? Like everybody, we don't need any more diets. Like we don't need any more diet books. We have, I think, all of the diets like down. People know in general, like that you need to basically consume less and exercise more, right? Like that's pretty much like all you need to know. But like we keep kind of like looking for like an easy answer,
Right.
and this kind of like explains like the demand and like prevalence of commodity content is
Okay.
because it's easy to create. Everyone's looking for like an easy answer and an easier way to create content and sort of like a cheat sheet, right, to marketing. But then on top of that, they're sort of being validated by this because the more shallow content tends to have more mass appeal. It's like easier. It's like easier to consume. It's easier to like digest a tweet or something that says like you should let everyone have a personal brand, or you should be nice to people. You know what I mean? You should.
Is this why on LinkedIn when people repost tweets that say things like build a personal brand on LinkedIn or post what you think on LinkedIn or the just really simple stuff? And is this why they get such high engagement? Just because for our brain that's just easy to understand and we think yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, like we exactly like it's easy to to digest, and we agree with it, and so it has mass appeal, right? So this is like actually an excellent media company type play, right? If you're going for just reach, and if your TAM is everyone, right? Like if you essentially like are going for the world, and that's the audience that you're trying to build, then this approach is fantastic for that because it gets like it gets that reach, right? And it still requires like some skill in that you have to like distill something to like the most simple form, and you have to have a hook like for it to really go viral. But if you look at a lot of viral content, it's mass appeal, and it's not very specific, and in that way it's not very helpful for most people, right? Like it's not going to explain something that you don't already know. Going back to like the diet example, like diets explain something that you already know. Most business books explain something that you already know.
Sure.
They're just putting it maybe in a form that's like slightly easier to digest, but they're not necessarily like adding anything new to your life. So that's kind of like commodity content, and I don't want to discount it because there is like that media brand play and like that awareness play that's really helpful at the beginning. And honestly, we do some of the viral high reach type content at our own company, right? But like I think like the big sort of like caveat is still having like the strategy of like, does this appeal to salespeople specifically, right? Like it can be you can still do memes, like, you can still do tweets, but, like, is this gonna appeal to, like, to a sales leader? Is this gonna appeal to, like, a sales rep?
Right.
And you have to know, like, the nuances of their day-to-day, to basically to sort of nail humor,
Yeah.
'cause otherwise it doesn't speak to them, right? It speaks to, like, if you don't know them, like, it's gonna sound like your point of view, it's gonna sound like a marketer, like, doing it, right? And so that's the difference, in sort of like elevating what I would, call sort of like now niche media content, right? It's like that's like this next step that you would take from like commodity to that, and then I can get into kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
in a second.
that's a great start. So is the rule of thumb on that, Camille, for commodity content that we shouldn't just put out a generic tweet or a generic post or something like that that's very simple to understand that might try and appeal to everyone unless we are some huge media company, but more so focus on something that might be a meme, might be a GIF, might be a retweet or something similar, but that's more going to actually be in tune with our ideal client profile, people that we actually want to attract and do business with. So they'll either find it funny, educational, helpful, and so on.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. So going back to like the media company sort of example, like media companies, they get revenue like through ad spend, right? And so like the more eyeballs like that you have on something, the more you can charge for your ads, and that's your revenue model, right? And so makes sense like that you would go for reach, right? Software companies are kind of like the opposite in some ways, right? Is that like if you're a startup SaaS company, you're looking to just break into the market. There's a lot of software. There's probably already software that does something similar to what you do, right?
Hmm.
Unless you're like a true sort of like category creator, you're probably not the first like in the market, and you're in at first like you're just trying to get like a piece of the pie. And typically, one of the best ways to get like a piece in the pie is to go niche, like is to go narrow
Yep.
and say like, okay, we're gonna go for specifically AEs or specifically like sales engineers, right? Instead of
Okay.
like trying to take like um, and so, even if your goal is like, okay, eventually we're going to take everyone, right? We're going to go like the Slack route, and we want to be like in every team's like home base or every team's like tech stack.
Yep.
A lot of people want that, right? Like everyone wants everyone, but it takes a lot of discipline to say, okay, like we're going to go like really niche, and we're going to like just take this portion of the market, and then like once we win there, we can like find the places to expand, because we're going to see like how they're referring it within their team and who else is using it. And that'll kind of like shape product direction. So where I'm going with this is, and how this relates to content is, for a software company, it often makes sense to go narrow and to create more of like a media company for your niche, right? And like this is where I think sometimes people go wrong, is like you just go for the vanity metrics of how many people are seeing my post, and assuming that like all is created equal there, right? That like an intern seeing your post is the same as like a decision maker seeing your post, right?
Yep.
Or you know what I mean? And so you're looking at just the quantity type metrics, right? Of likes and engagement and reach and stuff. And if you do that, you're going to be really disappointed with the end results of lack of revenue and like lack of quality pipeline, because you just went broad, and you don't get the benefits of like going specific, getting those feedback loops like from that specific group, because enough of those people are seeing it, and being someone's favorite, right? If you're trying to be everyone's favorite, you're probably going to be no one's favorite.
Gotcha. Okay. So are we talking about, like, for example, LinkedIn's an easy example, especially since they recently rolled out analytics so you can get more detailed on who has the demographics, job titles, who are actually engaging and viewing and consuming your content. So we're basically saying, look, if we post out generic things that we think everyone's going to like, and yes, we're getting tons of likes, we're getting tons of impressions in the feed, but then we actually look at the data and none of them, or a very small portion of them, fit the client, the niche that we're going after, it's probably a waste of our time.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, right? Is that like if you just go for quantity, it's like it's one going to be too overwhelming to like go in and nitpick like the quality of that audience, right? And you're just going to
Mm,
assume, right? You're going to be like, wow, like 1 million is better than 5,000, so like we should definitely keep doing this strategy. And and to some degree, like quantity can work, but it's sort
right.
of a dangerous game. So that's why I like to pair it with more category content that also sets you up as like a leader in the space, and like then you can be known for that. Because the other problem with with a commodity content is just the fact that anyone can do it, right? Like any of your competitors can do it. Any of them can
Yep.
like sort of copy that strategy and like catch up to you pretty fast, right? And you're not really
Sure.
known for anything. You're just there. Like you're just either repurposing, right? You're like a syndicator. You're like sort of like repurposing other content,
Yep.
or you are not adding like enough value for people to just keep coming back to you specifically, right? Like they're like maybe like they'll continue following you and like you're fun to have around, but you need to like add sort of unique point of view and value for you to be like the leader in the space. And so I can give some examples here, but this kind of goes in nicely to like what is category content or what are the factors.
Yeah, it kind of, without talking about myself too much, it kind of reminds me of when I started on LinkedIn. I basically did what I shouldn't do. I tried to appeal to everyone, and I'd make posts some days on business, some days were on sales, some days were on marketing, some days would be on websites. So probably across the week, it was just a spectrum of anything and everything. And I was wondering why I didn't get inquiries or inbound leads or become recognized for what I wanted to know. And then when someone said, like, Sam, what do you actually do? I kind of realized was the broke me into the realization that I should probably drill down into, in my case, websites and SEO, and actually post kind of tips and share useful insights and stories around that. And lo and behold, once I actually drilled down and got a bit more niche, that's when kind of the inquiries started to come over time. So with that said, does, and this can apply to commodity and content and category content when we get to it, is this just for social? Because I know we've talked about LinkedIn or Twitter. Does that apply to lots of other different channels as well, Camille?
No, yeah, it applies to all channels. So I'll give an example that's like non-social, just as an example. So a few things come to mind. So SalesLoft at one point did a piece around um, personalization in email, right? And analyzing I think like millions of emails and finding that 20% is kind of like the sweet spot, and that you should personalize 20% of your emails versus 100%, and that's where you're going to get like the most efficiency, kind of like the best bang for your buck. So I have kind of like this deep insight into that, backed with data, right? And that's ultimately a blog, but then you're able to repurpose like those insights for social, or for like a larger report. And so it's more like what's the sort of like pillar content, or like point of view that you're starting with, and then finding the best way to sort of like distribute that and like promote it to your market, like get it in front of the people who care about that content. The example that I'll give for Julie, just to give us a shout out, is we did like a sales happiness index. And so like one
Okay.
that's interesting, in that we worked with a PR agency, and they essentially did a little bit of analysis and were like, this is gonna like hit the best like for the market, and that nothing really exists for this right now. So that's like category factor number one, right? Is like nothing like this report exists right now. And then number two, like what one thing that Dually actually does, like the product actually does, is like increase seller happiness and like sales happiness and satisfaction, both for the reps and then for leadership. And then there's like a productivity element in there too. And so we made sure that those types of questions were in the report of like, what are you doing after hours? How are you working more or less? Anyways, so related to the product, right? Like there's product like strategy there. And then two, like not just having the report, but then also distilling it for people. What's the shorter version? Like what's kind of like the blog version that we can turn this into, and what's that sort of like headline going to be? And so So the headline ended up being like 41% of the work week or the sales work week is not spent selling, right? And that's costing companies 38% in revenue every quarter. So that's like we tell you like the point and like sort of our take. It's not even our take, like we're backing it with data, but we're basically
Yep.
sharing like the market problem that we help solve like in the beginning by kind of surfacing the point like of the whole thing at the top. And then we break down like, here are all the blockers that are getting in the way. Here's how else they're spending their time that's not contributing to revenue at all. And so so really like breaking it down so that it's simple and it's clear, and maybe like in that way resembles like the things that work about commodity content, but in like a very category like approach, right? So like the best like category content still uses the best practices from like copywriting, right? Like surfacing like the point like to the top, having a hook, and like simplifying the takes, right? Like 1, 2, 3, boom, boom, boom. Like here are the things you want to know.
Yep.
So like they're still easy to consume, but there's like more substance behind it. There's like real research that goes into it. There's a real like analysis on like how this relates to us and like with the takeaways from it. So we're not expecting people to go through and sift through all the stats and all the results. We're just kind of like surfacing the ones that people care about.
Got it. So it sounds like category content is a lot more in depth in terms of using research, using data, using insights, whereas commodity is a lot more surface level, easy to produce, easy to consume, has that hook. Whereas category is actually taking the best practices from the commodity. So it's reeling you in with the hook, making it easy to understand. You can kind of skim parts if you want to, but you can get kind of more in depth if you want to look at the stats, if you want to look at the breakdowns and all that good stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like the way that I think about it is point of view. Like factor number one is you need a point of view. And this goes back
Right.
to not only content strategy, but really like your business strategy, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
what is the problem that you've seen in the market, right? And then how are you fixing it? What's your approach to fixing this problem? And then your approach to fixing that problem, and why that problem exists, and why people should care about it. Like that's your business strategy, but it also can be your content strategy. And so so starting with that, like having something to say essentially is what it goes down to. And then using like real data, and it can be qualitative, it can be quantitative, but using kind of real data, and like social proof on like why we think this way, what we've seen in the market that made us think this, and what our customers have seen, what other people are seeing, bringing all of that to kind of support your point of view. So that's kind of like the next thing. And then the third thing is simplifying or explaining a concept in a new way. So
Okay.
if you think about this again, like you're not going to be the only one who in your category forever. Like other people, if it's successful, other people are going to like jump in and try and replicate what you've done. It's always going to be the case. And so from a marketing perspective, the way that you win is you own the category because you convey your point of view and you convey the problem better than anyone else has. And you see this like going back to the personal content, going back to LinkedIn content, right? Nothing is new. Like no one's like coming up with worlds shattering like points of view. Like it's all out there in terms of like whether it's been like addressed before. So it's all about how can you package that content in a way that makes it feel new, right? Like
Yep.
and that makes it feel basically like when you get it, right? Like we've all read books or posts or blogs that's like, oh, I've never thought about it that way. Like you want your audience to think that like I've never thought about it that way, because you're able to explain it like clearly, and like with a different angle. And that kind of leads me to number 4, which is the final one, which is it sticky? And so part of the way that you do this is through storytelling.
Okay.
And storytelling, like and creativity, like at its most like base form, is really just like connecting two different things. And oftentimes for SaaS, that's like, here's the problem, I'm going to explain this very clearly so that you agree that it's the problem, or at least we can have the discussion that it's a problem. And then I'm going to connect it to like this solution over here. We're going to like connect these two things, and we're going to do that through a metaphor, like a story, something that's like that makes it click for you, right? And so this is why like metaphors and similes and stories work so well, because you're relating it to something that somebody already understands, and already sort of like agrees with, right? Where if you're saying like, for this concept right here, commodity versus category, right? Like I think in a recent post, like I talked about commodity content being like empty calories, right? Being like donuts, right? And so we all agree with that. Everyone's like, yeah, we agree that donuts are empty calories, and that they're not great for you long term. And so you're using that as kind of like the stickiness of like, yeah, like heads are nodding now because we all agree donuts are empty calories, and I can see now the connection that you're making by even calling it commodity content to begin with. I understand the concept of commodity and what you might be getting at here, and then sort of like making that connection to, okay, here's like more of the answer with category content, and then breaking that down into 4 like simple steps. So getting sort of meta here and like using the concept to explain the concept, but the point here is like the stickiness factor, and why like commercials work, and why like big brands continue to like lean into concepts that seem to have nothing to do with what they actually sell. What Geico does, for instance, like the 15 minutes a day type commercials, and with the gecko, like it's creating this like recognition like pattern
Yep.
that you that makes it sticky, right? And so stickiness is kind of the last one.
Awesome. Can you just remind us of the 4 steps that you walked us through then?
Sure. So point of view, I'm having a unique point of view, and then research or social proof, like the reason that I should believe you, and then number 3 is kind of comes down to clear communication at its base, but being able to explain something better than anyone else. And then 4, that kind of like um, it kind of helps with 3, like they kind of work in tandem together. But 4 is that stickiness factor, and this kind of goes into like copywriting and distribution strategies. But like, how am I going to remember you?
Awesome. I really appreciate the breakdown. That's made it crystal clear and been very actionable in terms of how people can put it into play. So with that said, is it a no-brainer? Should every business focus on category content, or is it as simple as that or not?
I think that if you are starting from scratch and no budget, then probably like your best like avenue is to go pure like organic content, right? And you're not worried about like social, and you're not even like that worried about capturing demand. And so if that's the case, you should start with category content, because you should be, as you did, sort of like carving out this sort of like name for yourself and being known for something. I think it's in some ways like easier to do if you are a solo marketer or a solo entrepreneur, because you have like your own points of view, and you don't have to get buy-in sort of like from the rest of the company to do it. And you can just kind of carve out your own niche. So I think in that case, like, go all in on category content. I think a lot of like software companies can and should do that. What it needs to start with is usually like, clear business strategy, and clear positioning. And once you have like those things set, like then you
Yep.
can create category content. Like then you can create basically like a very tight content strategy. And so if you don't have those things, or you're still kind of like working on product market fit, or you have sort of a tighter sort of runway for investors, or things like that, where you need to basically be capturing some demand, and or just building like a bigger audience, then it often makes sense to sort of like combine the two, right? Where it's like you have your kind of more tends to be like more commodity content that gets more eyeballs and that brings in like more awareness, and you kind of use that as your distribution and sort of reach engine,
Yep.
to just get known at the beginning, because it does take time to like build and like be known for something in if you're building a category. So
Sure.
you have that as kind of something to, I think of it as like buying you time, or creating like that runway for you to build like this larger thing that's more of an investment and it takes more time. So you start with that and you build an audience off of that. Um, and you pair that with some of like the category content that's going to get less eyeballs, but it's going to get more of the right eyeballs. And if you have both of those things like kind of together, then that's kind of where the sweet spot is, because you can sort of bring in a larger audience, bring in like more eyeballs, and just make sure it's like it's in your niche still, but maybe still has like broader appeal. And then and then you pair that with kind of like the hyper specific thing of like, this is like, if we had this one persona, if we could speak to this like one person, then like our whole business would change, or like our whole projections would change. And so you hyper focus like on that with some of the category content, and you pair those things together, and it's kind of a sweet spot.
Awesome. So, with that said, you mentioned earlier, I think it was Salesforce as an example. So, if a company wants to get started on, for example, putting together category content, should they put together really long form articles that do what you guys at Dooley have done or Salesforce have done, that are giving that unique point of view, still following some best practices from commodity content, using hooks, making it easy to consume, but then coming in with unique data points, ideas, their own thoughts, their own opinions, and all that good stuff, put it into a massive long form article on their website, and then chop it up into a bunch of social posts, maybe podcast videos and all that good stuff? Or is there a strategy that you've seen works really well for it?
Yeah, so I mean, it really depends on your audience, right? Like, where does your audience live right now? You have to start with that, and then you're going to create both a content creation and a content distribution plan around that, right? And so I would use that as kind of like the caveat for this, but then I'll give kind of a few examples that come to mind. So um, the going back to kind of like those four factors, a couple things smart that I've seen SaaS companies do lately are, one, like, use your own product data. Like, that's unique to you, like that's unique to your product, and you can essentially like build your own internal feedback loops, right? Like, how is everyone using our product, and if we have enough like users on here, then are we able to use those insights in our content? So going back to this example from SalesLoft, and that they're able to use their own like email product data as part of their marketing. Gong's done this for sales calls as well, and so it's not always possible, but you can do that. And then there's other examples of like what I call like contextual content, but it sort of falls into this like product strategy, where you have maybe templates like within your content, right? Or like to help people get started kind of like with your product, and really like what that is use cases, right? Like, now I'm contextualizing like how you'd use the product, and I might be using use cases from other customers, or I might be using them from consultants that like you really respect, right? And so if you use some of those, like, again, like, it's while you may be leaning on other partners and customers and not technically you are able to like create this library that nobody has. And so that's like another way that I've like seen
Okay.
it done. And then sort of the last thing is tapping into your internal expertise. So this can take a few different forms. Like, your founder, if they have a very clear like point of view and positioning on the market and the problem that they solve, then that can create like very good category content, right? Because it's like, this is broken. Like, it's oftentimes like you come up with those types of thought leadership articles of like, this is broken, here's why, here was my experience, here's why it doesn't work anymore. And yes, like, that can start as an article. I think most powerful is when if you have that person internally that's a subject matter expert and respected by the people you're selling to. So if you're a salesperson, it would be like your VP of sales, or in our case, our founder is also a salesperson, or started as a salesperson. And so both of them are internal subject matter experts. And so having an interview like this with them about their point of view, like, captures that video that is very easy to repurpose. If you capture video and conversation, then like now you're able to repurpose that for YouTube. You're able to repurpose clips for social. You
Yep.
are able to turn it into an article. So I find like that the best way to, one, be able to collaborate with the people that have the knowledge. Like they're probably the most willing to sit down and chat than they are to like sit down and write an article. So that requires like a lot of it requires them to like to be a good writer, and also to like have the time to kind of like flesh out their thoughts. Whereas like they can just share their thoughts, and then a writer or a content marketer can come in to kind of like help categorize or simplify some of those thoughts.
Awesome. Yeah, great example. I mean, like you say, video, podcast, recordings, the possibility is almost endless because you can really repurpose it, chop it up, transcribe it, get it into an article, get it into a blog, get it into a short form post, and you're good as gold. So that's good. So taking everything we've now learned in terms of the differences between category content and commodity content, the pros and cons, how to get started, how can we turn this into cash in the bank, into revenue for our business? What kind of timelines are we talking, and how does it actually convert viewers into demo requests, strategy calls, or whatever the kind of final call to action, the final conversion point is that we want prospects to speak to sales teams for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, what it comes down to is marketing is still, even with the best strategy, marketing is still going to be like a series of like strategic bets. And so you're going to take bets on like this. This is like the content that is going to support our argument and explain a concept like in a way that is going to make sense. And so if you're wanting to get to revenue faster, then you build a cadence or like a regular cadence of explaining, educating the market. And so this is why like I like social so much, is because you would be able to break down what I would consider like category content into micro videos, or into like a graphic that explains a concept in a very like simple way. And you could post those like every single day. And then you're educating your market like every single day on this like broader pillar strategy. You're giving them like a piece of it every single day.
Okay.
And then eventually like a potential buyer is educated enough like that that they come inbound, right? And there's two things that go into it, like the consistency of like seeing you every day, and not just seeing you, because that can be commodity content, right? And that can't necessarily make an impact for your bottom line, but like learning from you every day. So if they're learning from you every day, and I think that comes in two forms of like, you know, they're learning like a new stat, or they're learning something new about the market that they didn't know, like the actual explaining education piece. And then there's the like insight piece where like they feel like a light bulb's gone off, right? They're like, oh, I've never thought about it that way before. If you're doing
Yeah.
like both of those things consistently, then you're gonna like bring in revenue. I think like some leading indicators that you can look at on social are just who are the people that are engaging with this, right? Like who's liking it, who's commenting, are they tagging other people, are they sharing it with other people? Those are going to be like more of your leading indicators on like whether they consider this good or like relevant sort of content.
Okay.
And then on the website, something that I look at as well is there's a feature in Google Analytics under goals, where if you set like the goals to be like, demo request or signups or whatever, then you can see the where that person converted, but then you can also see like the 2 or 3 pages before that they looked at to convert, right? And so it might be something like case studies, like in some cases. For us, like this is kind of how we saw that like some of the category content was working, was because it would be like the step or two before they converted, right? Before they like requested a demo, before they signed up for content. And so I look at those types of things to see, website content, what is resonating with people. And then also there's like the qualitative stuff of, again, going back to that same example of that report, somebody shared with us like, hey, this is great. And like linked to that report of like, this is really quality content, right? And so your audience will tell you. But the thing I would just look out for is, it's easy to fall into the trap of for marketers of like, you're doing great marketing, like we love your marketing, but is that coming from your audience, like your target audience, or is that coming from other marketers, right? Like, is that coming from people that that just like you, or they just like your style and stuff? That's not it's not worthless, but it can be like distracting. So just be careful on like who you listen to, and where you're getting your sort of like feedback loops, and use that to kind of like fuel the next thing.
Interesting. How do you claim that when leads come in, whether they're demo requests, which I guess they would be for Dooley, that it's from the content that you've created? Are we talking dark social? Are we talking how did you hear about us, or the sales reps? How did you hear about us on inquiry forms? Are we talking the sales reps ask, kind of when they pick up the initial discovery call and say, look, how did you stumble upon us today? And then they're saying, look, we followed you on LinkedIn, or we followed a piece of content on articles and that kind of stuff? Or is that how we're attributing it to the work we're doing, or is there other ways?
Yeah, so the most valuable type of feedback, and the most valid is the, how did you hear about us? Like, ideally, you want to track like all the way to somebody actually requesting a demo, or somebody actually being qualified. And so the more you can track like deeper in the funnel, the better. Of like, what was it that not only got you interested, but like, why are you here? And oftentimes, if you have that open text field, then you're able to get more. Like, they might tell you like 2 or 3 executions that worked well for them, or 2 or 3 channels. So if you can do that, great. Like, we're in the process of doing that right now. And so in the interim, another thing that's worked well for us is UTM links. Like, this is a little bit tricky because it goes against like how people typically consume content and how they prefer to request demos. But like, it still gives us like leading indicators of like, okay, if we know that like a couple people clicked this UTM link like on this content, that there are probably more people that were impacted by it, but just didn't want to click the link because that's just not how we typically interact with content. So so I use that as well. On the demo forms, it does show like the UTM link of like the campaign, that is how they sort of like came in. So we use that. And then some other sort of things that we piece together to get the full picture are what you mentioned, sales calls, right? And so you can in Gong, and I think now in Chorus, like you can add a keyword that you're trying to track, right? So if you know that like podcast is like the main thing you're leaning into, then maybe you'll set like a keyword for podcast that you want to like track on those sales calls that are sort of like ping. And then same thing with like LinkedIn, right? If you know like that's a big part of your content strategy, and something that you want to track, you can set up like that as a keyword too. It's not a perfect system, but the second part of this is just having good transparency within the team. So the sales team knows that like it's helpful for us to know what's working, and it's helpful for them so that they can get better quality leads, right? And so they're pretty good about saying, hey, like this person came from this, or this person mentioned this. Like they'll share that feedback, so that we can create those kind of feedback loops. And then again, like dark social you mentioned. So this is another like hard thing to do, but anytime there's like some love, like some Dooley love, in terms of like, it's usually in like a DM, it's somebody like DMing me and saying like, hey, like love your content. And then I'll usually say like, why, right? Like what was it that you specifically liked? And then I'll try and like share that feedback, or, iterate on that feedback to make our marketing better.
Awesome. I think you've covered almost every angle. And I think what I like about that is you've covered it more than most people do. A lot of marketers get a bit shaky when I ask about how is this actually contributing to revenue. But I like that you're almost covering every angle, from kind of how did you hear about us right through to Google Analytics, UTM codes, checking the engagement, checking ideal clients who are actually liking, engaging, sharing in the feed, which a lot of marketers I just don't think do enough of, or they don't understand how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, this is also just like a shout out to Jenna. So she's our head of RevOps, and she's done like a fantastic job in terms of like creating the dashboards and reports that gives kind of a little bit more. You can never see the full picture, right? But like it gives a bit more visibility. Yeah, it'd be too easy, right? But that just gives a little bit more visibility into like where do we think like everyone is coming in from based on what we're able to track, right? Based on like these like UTM links for both paid, and then we tend to use them for like organic social as well. And so based on that, based on like how a salesperson can manually like update something, or like we're pretty good about like manual updating if we get more data. So so there's that. And then our head of growth too sort of like led the charge in terms of like making sure we have better visibility, making sure that we're adding like that how did you hear about us.
Awesome. Is there a typical time frame if a business got started on creating category content today? Is there a time frame in which they can expect to start driving revenue from it?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. I know, like I keep saying depends, but it really depends on your sales cycle, right? Like if you're selling into an enterprise, like I would not expect this to work like within a month, within two
Yeah.
months. If you're more transactional, and have maybe like a bigger TAM in the market of maybe you're just like a more of a user um, type platform versus like B2B, again, like shorter sales cycles. And so it's hard for me to say like when you can expect to get results. But if I'm just going off like data points from me talking to other people about what they've seen from this strategy and what I've personally seen on doing this for myself, is like a quarter, right? So like 90 days basically
Okay.
of like consistent sort of like action.
Yeah.
Because I feel like it takes like a good maybe 60 to really like sort of break into sort of a market and get noticed at all, even if you're creating like top quality content every day. If you're starting from scratch, like you just need that repetition. But then a quarter typically is like enough to like to have to get traction for it to go all the way to a sales cycle or get all the way through a sales cycle.
And that makes sense, right? And it's like you say, it's going to depend on where your company's at, how long it takes for buyers to buy your stuff. If you're selling $100,000 a year product, it's probably going to take a bit longer than something that costs, I don't know, $20 a month. So it's all relative, like most things in marketing. But with that said, Camille, I really appreciate you coming on the show. This has been a very, very enjoyable episode. I think you've covered all points across both sides of content. So I want to thank you. And I also want to thank you for not buckling under some pretty tough questions that a lot of marketers would, and really going deep and really sharing how it contributes to revenue. So we'd love to have you back on the show at some stage for another topic. That'd be great. So with that said, thanks for coming on. Please do share about how everyone tuning in can connect with you, learn more, and anything you want to promote to our audience.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, first off, thanks for having me. Thanks for asking the challenging questions. I mean, that's like how you get better, right? Going back to the feedback loops. That's part of the strategy, is like you have to be challenged to get better. So appreciate that. And plug for me, I guess, is you can find me on LinkedIn. If you do have questions about any of this, like about category content, commodity content, how I'm thinking about it, what I'm seeing like in terms of our marketing strategy, connect with me, Camille Trent. LinkedIn's probably the best place. And then also you can and then take a look at Duly, both our blog. We're starting to do some interesting things in terms of thought leadership content, repurposing content, and yeah, and more explainer content. So we have like a pretty good mix over there. And then also really active on LinkedIn. So you can take a look at our page.
Awesome. And we'll put all of those over at the show notes, all those links on the show notes at businessgrowth.marketing. And with that, thanks once again for coming on the show, Camille. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it.
No worries. No worries at all. So as always, if you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to hit subscribe on YouTube, or if you're tuning into the audio podcast, a quick rating is always appreciated. And with that, we should catch you on the next one. Cheers for tuning in.